Suicide. Society has a weird relationship with it. When it's committed to stay true to one's ideals, we love it. But when it's committed out of despair, we feel pity or call them cowards. An article by Yale School of Medicine says that suicide is one of the leading causes of death in teenagers and young adults in the US. In 14 years, death by suicide increased by 62% among young people. Even children as young as 8 are not left behind. Society is quick to ask, what can we do about it? But it doesn't stop to think, why are people so miserable that it causes a rise in suicide? The harmful ideas society has about suicide make the problem actively worse. And to help those who have lost all hope is to dismantle this stigma. Only then can we be free from the scary shadow of suicide that's always looming over us. This is a critique of how society views suicide, leading to the rise of the problem. I'll be basing this video essay on Arthur Schopenhauer's own thoughts on suicide. But why am I basing this on some random 19th century German dude? Schopenhauer was weird, really weird. Not because of his mutton chops, that were just slightly more fabulous than J-Schlats. No, he was weird because he talked about things others never dared to. Sex. Something that was seen as lowly, dirty, and awkward. Not worth to be talked about in philosophy. But Schopenhauer wrote about it very nakedly, pun intended. Not because he was some gooner, but because he was dumbfounded that no one ever spoke of such a big part of human life. Another example, Asian philosophy like Buddhism and Hinduism is very popular today in the West. Part of that thanks to Schopenhauer. No Westerner saw Asian philosophy as something to be taken seriously until Schopenhauer came along and discussed it in depth. Schopenhauer's predecessors like Kant and his contemporaries like Hegel were the embodiment of why people hate philosophy. They raised more questions than answers, wrote things nobody understood, and their ideas were very overly complicated. Schopenhauer, on the other hand, was an artist's philosopher. He's called a pessimistic philosopher, but that's very unfair to him. He wasn't a doomer like a Redditor is. He was a pessimist like the Buddhists, by which I mean he accepted that you can't escape pain in life, but you can lessen it. There's a very special realistic hope in his philosophy that I think more people should be aware of. Regarding suicide, he is very sympathetic to those in deep despair. It's not that suicidal people want to die, he writes. Actually, they want to live really badly, but they're just very disappointed with what their life has come to. You know, there's a big meme going around about when a girl approaches a man, say a barista in a cafe or a stranger in the subway, we immediately imagine the rest of our lives living happily with her. But when that fantasy doesn't happen, reality crashes against us hard, harder than a truck in anime. For Schopenhauer, humans are controlled by what he calls the will to live. The will is like the force in Star Wars. It controls everything in the universe. It's the instincts that keep us alive. But it's also very dumb, delirious, and the thing that causes our existential despair. The will wants to avoid pain at all costs, so it creates fantasy scenarios we can retreat into. But when fantasy inevitably clashes against reality, we get overwhelmed by the pain. Why am I so lonely when everybody around me apparently isn't? Why don't I have anyone who can love me unconditionally? Why can't I be happy if happiness is always advertised as being within reach? But wait, how did we get here? Where did these life expectations come from? We weren't born with them, so who put them here? We are brought up with shows about friends going on adventures together, but then we realize that making friends is incredibly difficult, especially as an adult. Never mind keeping old friendships. We are told beautiful love stories and that a partner will make us whole, but then why do seemingly perfect relationships end so awfully? We hear tales of the American dream. Anybody can have a fulfilling life if they work hard enough. But then why do we struggle to do anything right even when giving our all. This isn't what we were promised. So we become disappointed, frustrated, desperate. When the despair of life outweighs its benefits, many see no way out but to take their own lives. One side of society is concerned with helping those suffering. According to the Center for Suicide Prevention, the stigma around suicide and society's misconceptions has real psychological impact on those suffering. But the other side thinks it's cowardly to do the act that adds it all. No way I'd ever be so weak as to take my own life. This belief is expressed thanks to a superiority complex. But there's a third side that says it takes courage to do such a violent act. They think to bring a barrel to your own head takes balls. These three reactions of society to suicide are all shallow, ignorant claims. In reality, a desperate person's suicide is neither cowardly nor brave. It's just a final attempt to be free from the pain. Society might say that despair is a state and that it'll pass. They say we should always keep an eye out for happiness. But happiness is also a state. What kind of logic is there to despise one state but worship the other? To demonize despair is just as naive as to worship happiness. Instead, we should try to not call one thing bad and the other good. We should aim to live in the middle of both states, where we're not too deep in despair, but also not too high on happiness. For society, if someone wants to talk openly about suicide, they have to follow a script. Suicide has been on the rise. Here are the statistics. Men are more likely to take their own lives. Women are more likely to be depressed. This is very sad. You are loved. Your cries are heard. You matter. Most talks on suicide are like this, because people are afraid that the stigma around suicide will affect them too. You have to always conclude that suicide is very bad. But condemning something the desperate person thinks about unintentionally makes them feel guilty. And to make someone who's in pain feel guilty isn't the way to help them. Condemning suicide comes from the belief that it's wrong. And this comes from society that still thinks that objective morality exists. In the Middle Ages, it was common for 14-year-olds to marry each other. In the 1700s, a person would atone for the crime of homosexuality by hanging. And until not too long ago, segregation was seen as justified in the US. If morality were objective, we'd still believe in these same things. But there's a special kind of morality that tries to fight this and be objective. Society's idea that there's a clear good and evil comes from 2000 years of Christian influence. This is especially ironic because nowhere in the Bible is suicide condemned. Schopenhauer himself points this out, saying that those who base their arguments against suicide on the Bible are left with extremely bad and shaky arguments. As far as I could find, these are the most commonly used arguments. Argument 1. Your body belongs to God. Only He can decide over your life and death. This is the exact mistake that Saint Augustine, a Christian philosopher, made. Let me set you the scene. In the ancient city of Antioch, there were 3 women that took their own lives to avoid being raped. Augustine said that even though they did no wrong in the eyes of God, they shouldn't have thought that rape would necessarily take away their purity, because for Augustine, purity is a state of mind. No sane person nowadays would ever want to agree with this. Augustine's claim completely ignores the very real psychological scars that rape leaves. Scars that you can't just think away and poof, they're gone. If there is one thing we should agree we have complete right over is our own bodies. Argument 2. Society violates the 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill. But remember, the Bible doesn't say anything against suicide. So many take this a step forward to mean that suicide is self-murder. This has another unacceptable consequence, because this view means that a person who takes their own life out of despair is as bad as Hitler, and both deserve the same place in hell. Still, it's worth noting that the Catholic Church has accepted the impact of mental illness and suicide, at least in theory. This is especially thanks to the work Catechism of the Catholic Church by Pope John Paul II. Argument 3. Schopenhauer says that in Christianity, to endure suffering, like Jesus did on the cross, brings the highest meaning to life. But this interpretation of the meaning of the cross mistakes pain for suffering. There's a famous Buddhist teaching called the parable of the two arrows. An archer shoots two arrows at someone. The first arrow is pain. It's always going to hit a person no matter what. The second arrow is suffering. To be hit by this arrow is completely optional. You can't escape the pain in life, but you can minimize it by not suffering. Christianity says that it's acceptable to want to be hit by the second arrow. This is why the idea that people have of a Christian is this person who's always in great and unending pain, as seen in many Catholic art. But this is no way to live. Even if you look at it through the POV of Jesus, you come to the same conclusion. Jesus endured the pain of the nails. He didn't suffer from the trauma it might have caused him. Otherwise, he could have never forgive those who hurt him. As the story goes, it's not suffering that should be endured. It's pain. But Christianity isn't the only belief system that influences our misconceptions about suicide. Like with many things in our Western world that are great, like art, freedom, and femboys, the absolutely awful and downright stupid can be traced back to the Greeks. In Athens, if someone committed suicide without permission from the state, they'd be thrown into an unmarked burial pit outside the city. Their hand would be cut off and buried somewhere else, because it was seen as the offender. The Greek philosopher Aristotle said that suicide is a crime against the state, and that it's very cowardly. A very mind-boggling thing in many Greek philosophers is how little they seem to care about the well-being of an actual individual human being. Back then, a person's identity started and ended in their role in serving the state. In 1670, the King of France passed a new law of a harsher punishment for people who committed suicide. Their bodies would be dragged face down through the streets, then hung or thrown on a pile of garbage. The person's belongings were then taken away to cripple the family financially, with the aim of preventing another suicide. You know, as if treating your loved one like a mob wasn't lovely enough. Up until the Suicide Act of 1961, if a person failed to commit suicide in the UK, they could be imprisoned, fined, or receive a probation order. This is extremely dumb, because, as Schopenhauer says, if someone is punished for trying to commit suicide, it's his clumsy failure that's being punished, not suicide itself. But you know, why does this matter? Suicide was legalized in the West by the 20th century, and yet, even though it isn't a crime anymore, politics still sees suicide as a threat to its power. In politics, the individual person doesn't matter. How could it? It's impossible to care for every individual when you're dealing with so many people at once. I'm not just smoking acid here. The centuries-long criminalization of suicide impacts the very language we use every day. That's why we say commit suicides, like we do with commit a crime. Existential dread. The latest hit in mind fashion. Everyone is feeling it. Your friends, your mom, your dog, after you forgot to feed him at the usual hour. This might seem like I've put on a tinfoil hat, but science plays a huge part in our existential angst. We like to think of science as an ally to the suicidal person. Psychology and neuroscience have advanced a great deal and have helped many desperate people, that much no one can deny. But society holds science to this crazy stature. Children are taught in schools that science is this all-rational, all-good being that's here to help humans. In other words, a god to be worshipped. If you have a problem, you can just pray to the science god. Its messenger, the internet, will give you an all-you-can-eat buffet of science-based guides on how to solve your problems. Don't know how to be disciplined? Here's a quick way to conquer your monkey brain. Want to master your emotions? Here's a simple guide to do it. Want to heal your rotted Gen Z brain from all the lobotomized content? We got that too. The worship of science as a god has a very negative impact on our lives. Science is a big reason for our existential anxiety because it dehumanizes us. When science talks about humans, it's not talking about people, it's talking about biological machines. The mysteries and intricacies of the human experience that make existence interesting have to be undermined for science to be able to do its thing. Everything we think we are can be explained through cold chemistry. Our identities, the thing that gives us meaning, is just a product of biology and evolution. Your love for your wife? It's just a biological mechanism to ensure the survival of the species. Your sadness when your grandma dies? Just the brain signaling that you're one member short in your tribe and you're more likely to die now. Your desire for happiness? Just a chemical reaction to avoid harm and seek rewarding pleasures. If you live your life in such a dehumanizing scientific way, you quickly develop a real bad existential crisis. Many don't see a way to escape the existential anxiety brought by science. After all, how could you escape the almighty God of truth? In the end, many suffering from existential dread see only one way out. Society has to seriously reflect on its darkest aspects and throw away the parts that are making the suicidal person feel worse. But at the end of the day, societal changes come from us, the individual. We have to realize the darkest parts of society and set the example. Only then can we see a real drop in those scary charts that get higher each year. And for the suicidal person, know that change is possible. Society's and yours. It's true that suicide is a very permanent solution to a very impermanent despair. And Schopenhauer would agree that suicide doesn't make despair go away. It only makes you go away forever. And then you'll never know if tomorrow will finally be the beginning of your journey of rebirth.